Hello and welcome to the first edition of Challenge 92. Before we start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this project, but I will keep it short and sweet. My name's Daniel Raza. I'm a huge football fan and a sports journalist that is maybe just a little bit obsessive. So obsessive that when I thought about this challenge, I wanted to make sure it was different. We won't be focusing just on the football on the pitch, but we're going to be talking about the DNA of every club in the Football League. We're going to be talking about the fans, the area, and the soul of the club. We're going to have a lot of interesting guests on over the next few months, and we're going to begin in Plymouth, making our way all the way up to Newcastle. So it gives us quite a bit of range to see how different each club in the Football League is. If you enjoy the show today, tell me what you liked and perhaps what you think would make this project just that little bit better. Hopefully, by the end of this challenge, we will have 92 wonderful audio profiles of all the clubs in the Football League. Make sure you pack some snacks and sit tight. We're about to go on a sightseeing trip around the country's 4 major football leagues. Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Challenge 92. You will have heard a little bit about what this project is in the introduction, but of course, every journey has to start somewhere. My name's Daniel. I'm going to be with you right the way up until the end of this podcast and hopefully right the way up until the end of the season. I'm aiming to talk to one fan from every single club in the Football League. As you know, it would be pretty difficult to group them all in one particular order, but I am starting at the southernmost club in England. That is, of course, Plymouth Argyle. A club which is known for having quite a vocal fan base. A club which has a lot of personality about them. And, of course, going back onto that fan base, calling themselves the Green Army. I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about this club. I've got to be honest with you, I can't remember the last time my team played them, being in the Championship. But indeed, I think it's time to welcome on our guest today. I have the Plymouth Argyle fan and journalist, writer for Plymouth Argyle Live, Jak Ball. He is with me today. Jak, how's it going?
Hello, thank you very much for having me on. I feel honoured to be the very first guest on this ambitious project of yours.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for joining me, Jak. I mean, I'm hoping I'm hoping this lasts the way all the way. Well, I'm hoping this lasts the way all the way up until Newcastle. So if that is the case, if this is done, then it would be good to be the first guest.
Yeah, definitely, and I look forward to listening to more as it goes on. It'll be quite an interesting journey up the country.
So I mean, we're starting here obviously because it's the southernmost club. I think that's something interesting in its own because the south doesn't really have an awful lot of clubs in the Football League, and I'm not quite sure why that is, but I'm assuming that means that Plymouth must get a huge fan base from sort of the surrounding area.
Well, Plymouth Argyle are quite often described as a sleeping giant. You know, they're the biggest city, Plymouth, to have never played in the top flight of English football. So, whenever a new manager comes in, whenever new investors come in, the words sleeping giant and potential are always thrown around. They get quite a good fan base. It was much better when they were in the Championship. Under the current management of Derek Adams, fans have started to come back. Football's been a bit more entertaining. They've obviously been promoted season before last into League One. Had some good cup ties, and there's a real feel-good factor around the place at the moment. But yeah, I mean, the closest club to us in the Football League is Exeter City, and then further afield than that, you've got Bristol, which is still 2 hours away. So a lot of miles on the road for anyone that follows Argyle.
So obviously you mentioned Bristol City, who aren't too far away. You say 2 hours away. Is that considered a local derby for Plymouth Argyle fans? Because I know you produced somewhat of a giant killing this week.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not quite considered a local derby, but of course, in League One, Bristol Rovers is our closest team. But yes, we played Bristol City in the Cup for a second successive season. We played them in the first round of the League Cup last season on a bit of a hiding to nothing. We got battered 5-0 in that game. And the manager, Derek Adams, said he would not make as many changes as he did last season because it went horribly wrong. Only made, I think, 4 or 5 changes this time around. And yeah, we beat Bristol City 1-0. I think there were just under 1,000 Argyle fans there, which isn't bad for a Tuesday night, 2 hours away. And the first game of this season, we went to Walsall, and I spoke to some of the media at Walsall, and they said that their journey to Plymouth when it would come later in the season was their longest of the season. Whereas for us, Walsall was the third closest game. So again, it just goes to show that the amount of travelling that we have to do. But it was a very enjoyable night on Tuesday, that's for sure.
Well, I know we're definitely going to be speaking a little bit more about the fan base and what makes them more unique a little bit later on. But just sort of to sort of sum up the start of this show, I think it's worth sort of mentioning as a Plymouth Argyle fan, since this is the first episode in the podcast and it is very early in the season. What's the outlook like for the season? Considering that you've got a fairly good squad on you. Yeah, you've got Matt Macy on loan from Arsenal. You've got a really exciting Portuguese lad in Ruben Lameiras, and Graham Carey's still there as well, which is great. A bit of a cult hero over there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, for the last few transfer windows, I think every Argyle fan's been grateful that Graham Carey's still signed on the books at Argyle come the end of that window. He's been fantastic since he's arrived from Scotland. Obviously, last season, again, I don't know how much people from a wider audience really paid much attention to Plymouth Argyle, but, come December of last season, we were bottom of League One. And we all thought, we're going to get relegated. This is going to be an awful season. We had at one point in the start of September, we'd had more red cards than we had points, and things just weren't going particularly well. And like I said, still in the start of December, we're still bottom of the table, and things just looked absolutely dreadful. But Derek Adams has done a fantastic job since arriving down from Scotland, and he somehow he transformed the fortunes of the team, and we kept winning and winning and winning, and to the point where we got into the playoffs, which seemed remarkable. And then injuries took its toll, and it got to the point where we had kids on the bench that just didn't have any experience. And in the end, we finished seventh, one place outside the playoffs. So coming off the back of that, some fans would want us to try and push for the playoffs again, but it's a really tough league, League One. You've got Sunderland coming into the league, and I think they're getting a £33 million parachute payment, which, I don't think Argyle has spent anywhere near that in their whole history, let alone, in one season. The disparity between some of the teams in this league is so vast, probably the most vast anywhere in the world, I'd imagine. You've got the likes of Sunderland and the likes of Accrington in the same league, which is just worlds apart. So it's tough. I think Derek Adams would always say the first goal would be safety, and then he'll be trying to push for the top half, and then hopefully going on to get the playoffs. But he's a very ambitious manager, and he's a winner. He doesn't like to lose. So I would be quite confident in getting maybe a top half finish. I would sort of hope we could try and push for the playoffs, but League One's a very tough league.
So tell me, Jak, a little bit more about yourself as a fan. How did you actually become a fan of Plymouth Argyle to start with?
Well, it's quite funny, really. I grew up hating football, funnily enough, which my whole
Seriously?
life, my whole life now revolves around football. I remember getting to weekends, and I wanted to play games with my family. They'd all be sat on the sofas watching football, watching Soccer AM in the mornings, and it used to make me hate it. And funnily enough, my younger brother used to love football, and he used to know all the names of all the players. And I remember saying to him, I must have been about 9, and he must have been about 7. I was like, "How do you remember all these random people's names?" And I never really understood it. But part of me had a soft spot for Manchester United, because my mum supports Manchester United, and so I grew up with that sort of somewhere in the back of my head. And I got to the age of about 12, and all my friends at secondary school started telling me about Plymouth Argyle and how they were always going. And I thought, you know what, I want to see what this is like. I want to go and taste a bit of this. So I said to my dad, "Can you take me along?" And he did. Him and my brother went along. And immediately, being in the crowd, I just fell in love with it. And that's how I really came to enjoy it. And that was when I was about 12. So prior to that, I didn't really have that much interest in football, which many people find quite amazing.
That's crazy because, like, for a lot of people, they start off by watching a big team on the television, right? Like, they see Manchester United, they see Chelsea play, but for you, it was that experience of, you weren't exposed to those big teams to start with, where you walked into the stand and that was your thing, wasn't it? That was what made you fall in love with football.
Well, yeah, like I said, it's just the fact that my parents always watched it on TV rather than playing games. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that my parents ignored me all the time, but it's just, I remember having such apathy towards it at the weekends because I didn't want to be doing that. And I used to enjoy playing football out with my friends out in the street, but I just never really resonated with it on the TV. It always seemed like this weird thing that was miles away. So yeah, it actually took me being there to really enjoy it. And that's actually something that's similar for me in a lot of sports. I've digressed a tiny bit. I never really watched basketball before, and I went to watch the Plymouth Raiders as part of my job as a journalist, and I fell in love with basketball. So for me, actually going and being part of it and seeing it in person is what makes me really start to get involved.
And I mean, I think my next question to you was like, what attracted you to the club? But I suppose that it wasn't. was there anything special about Argyle which you think might not have happened? Say if you went into another ground, say if you'd been taken to an Arsenal game, say if you'd been taken to an England game, was there anything special about Plymouth Argyle itself that
If
struck
I'm
you?
being totally honest, no, not really. It was just the fact of going along. And don't get me wrong, Argyle fans are loud, and the stadium was great, especially when you hadn't witnessed anything like that before. So it's not like I was coming from
Mm.
a stadium like Old Trafford and then going into home park. So I think probably it would have been the same if I'd gone to a lot of clubs. But yeah, I do think Argyle's very special now. I like the fact that we're so far away from other clubs. I like the fact that we've never had that much success. And what I mean by that is it's exciting. All I've really
Yeah.
known is being an Argyle fan. So if you're a Manchester United fan, and obviously there's loads of Manchester United fans, but if you are, you know, when you watch a cup draw, you surely can't get the same excitement as what an Argyle fan gets when they could potentially play Man City. But the second round of the League
Yeah.
Cup draw, this has been recorded before that, but the likes of West Ham, we could draw in the second round of the Carabao Cup, and for me, that's exciting. But I know a Manchester United fan wouldn't be excited by the potential draw of of West Ham. So I quite like that fact. Don't get me wrong; I would like us to get there one day in my lifetime, and I hope that does happen. But it's sort of exciting that that hasn't happened yet because it's still to come, and that's a feeling that you get from within. It's not something that you can ever be taught. I don't think.
Well, it's coming because I think it was you've made it to the League Cup semi-final twice. I think once in 1974 and one in the 1950s. Somehow or another, that did
Yeah.
happen. Plymouth did make it to the semi-final of the League Cup before, and it's crazy because that win over Bristol was a big one because you don't, for some reason or another, Plymouth Argyle haven't had that many giant killings,
No,
but it has to be
well,
coming,
I'd
right?
hope so. It is really a once in a lifetime thing, and I did a piece for as part of my job saying why it was such a big deal that we had beaten Bristol City. For fans of other clubs, they probably think, oh, how ridiculous are these Plymouth Argyle fans for getting so happy that they've got into the second round. But the last time we got into the second round of the Carabao Cup was in 2012. And okay, that might not seem that long ago, but that was because we played Portsmouth at the time, who were one league above us. They were in League One, but they had to get rid of all their first team players to starve off liquidation. So they were playing basically a group of teenagers. So we beat them 3-0. But prior to that, I think it was back in 1999. So we really don't beat higher league opposition very often. Um, it's exciting. And I remember in my lifetime, since I've been going to the club, we did get to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup in, I think, 2007 when Ian Holloway was our manager. We played.
Oh, really?
Let me think. We beat Derby County in the last 16. And Derby County were top of the championship at the time, and we were mid-table. We beat them, and then we got Watford in the quarterfinals at home park. AD Buford was their manager at the time, and we absolutely battered them, but we could not score past whoever their keeper was. I can't remember who it was now. And then Hamid Bouatza scored a wonderful goal for Watford, and they won 1-0. So that was a quarterfinal. So that was exciting. So that's the closest I've come to getting anywhere near silverware as an Argyle fan. I think
How long ago was that?
2007 roughly. So 11 years ago now, but you know, it was an enjoyable time, and I would love another cup run like that. To get that far was really exciting.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. See, I don't know an awful lot about the past with Argyle, but I suppose you must have been going to games for years now. So it's great that you have seen like a great moment like that. I think that's what football fans live for, isn't it? You go to the ground and you hope that something happens. I mean, is there anything else which has stuck in your memory as a Plymouth Argyle fan that you're never going to forget
Yeah,
being there?
there's obviously a few games like big cup games, for example, because they don't happen very often. I remember we got Arsenal in 2008, I think it was, at the Emirates. And I think you have to double check this, but I think Argyle fans still have the record for the most away fans at that ground from that game. Um, I think it was over 9,000, I
Oh,
believe. So
really?
that will have to be checked, but I'm pretty sure that's still a record. And I think we lost 3-1, but I remember it was 0-0 at half time, and they had some very good players out. And as an Argyle fan, you don't really see top class players. So that was exciting. And I remember playing West Ham in the League Cup. Oh, I can't remember the exact year. It must have been over 10 years ago now. And it was the first time I'd ever been to a really big stadium. And I remember looking up at Upton Park at the size of the stand, and just thinking that this is crazy. That this is some people's Plymouth Argyle, if you know what I mean. This is some people's local club, and I couldn't quite get my head around that. And I was sat in the away, or stood in the away area, and Freddie Lundberg was taking West Ham corners, and I couldn't quite believe that this big name was right in front of me. And as an Argyle fan, you're just not used to that. And it's exciting. So that stays with me as well. And obviously, last 2 seasons ago, we played Liverpool at Anfield in the FA Cup third round, and we held them to a 0-0 draw at Anfield. It was on TV, and then we had a replay back in Plymouth, and they beat us 1-0. Annoyingly, it was the smallest player on the pitch, Lucas, that scored from a header. To Yeah, he scored a header from the corner, I think it was, and put Liverpool into the lead, and they won the game 1-0. But games like that always stay in the memory because it just doesn't happen often. Away from cup games, one of the games that sticks in my mind the most is a championship game when we beat Leicester City 1-0. And a lot of people that listen to this might think, well, why did that matter to you? But it was because Ian Holloway had left Argyle in the November. He'd been saying all week that he would never leave Argyle, that he had green blood, and he was so popular with Argyle fans. And a week later, he left. He handed his resignation in and went to Leicester City, who were near the bottom of the league. And we played them at the King Power Stadium in, I think, the following March. And Argyle fans went there wanting Holloway's blood. They really, really, because of their love for him, that transpired into how much they hated him because he was so popular. If that makes sense. And I remember Peter Halmosi, who was Hungarian, who scored the only goal of the game. And I remember the atmosphere just went absolutely crazy. I will never forget the atmosphere because I think it probably is the loudest I've ever been in amongst an Argyle crowd. And I remember the stand was physically shaking because fans were jumping up and down. And that will stay with me forever. Even to this day, 11 years later, Ian Holloway's left, and there's still that bitterness inside me. And I think if a lot of Argyle fans are being honest, they still hold that bitterness because he was such a popular manager. But he ended up getting Leicester City relegated that season. So that was paid back enough. But that stays with me as well, that game.
Is a rivalry with Luton Town still a thing? Because I read somewhere that Joe Kinnear made some weird comments about Bristol. About Plymouth Argyle. At around
really
2001, 2002.
These days, I think there's been times in the past where there's been rivalries because both teams have been going for the sort of same thing, whether it's promotion and whatnot. Over the last few years, there's been a little bit of rivalry there because both were trying to get out of League Two and both were battling for promotion. But over the last few years, teams like Portsmouth, there's been a bigger rivalry with them. So no, I wouldn't say that that Luton's overly a big rivalry anymore.
Right, let's talk a little bit about the social factors about this club. What makes it so special to the community? I mean, the first thing to ask really is what is unique about the matchday experience as a Plymouth Argyle fan, and what is the atmosphere in the stadium really like? Is that Green Army really as vocal as they are famous for being?
Well, there's a thing called the Fan Fest at Plymouth Argyle, and I'm a bit ashamed to say that I've never actually been to one. I don't really do the big social thing beforehand, especially now that I work for every Argyle game. I don't get the chance. But before that, I just went with my dad and my brother, and we just went straight and sat in the seats and did that and went straight home afterwards. So I've never really done the sort of whole social fan thing. But I do know from a lot of people, a lot of friends, and through my job that the Fan Fest is widely respected by not only Argyle fans, but by away fans that come down to Home Park. They've got 2 local singers that sing fun songs and Argyle songs, and it's very stereotypically Devonian, I suppose. With the accents and all of that, and they sort of play on that, and it's really, really popular. And tickets sell out for it regularly, and people just come out of that really buzzing for the game. And like I said, that's away fans as well, and it's a classic example of fans of 2 different teams that can still enjoy themselves together.
So what is this like? This is like a ticketed event that happens before the game, like every Saturday, or
yeah, that's right. Every Saturday in a sort of just a marquee. They're building something more. There's redevelopment going on at Home Park at the moment. They're going to get a new grandstand redeveloped, and they're getting a proper place where this can happen. But up until now, it's always been in a marquee, and you can hear the music from quite far away, and it's a really good atmosphere. And everyone just has a few drinks, has some food, enjoys themselves, has a sing along. And I would say it's unique, and there's nothing else like it at any other ground, especially with, like I said, with all the Devonian links and just sort of the light-hearted side of it. There's nothing's taken seriously. It's just a laugh and fun, and like I said, away fans seem to love it as well.
That's great. I mean, that basically that's it's something that not a lot of clubs do. I mean, it's not something that I've actually heard of before. I mean, I've been to cricket games, and I've seen sort of stuff happening in the marquees and whatnot during the breaks, but I've never heard of that happening at a football ground. So I mean, that's That's amazing, really. I mean, is it also to do with, a lot of tourists being around Plymouth? I'm assuming because Devon
Um,
is a huge area,
it
isn't it,
is,
for
but
for,
no, I
for
don't think that's
tourists?
got anything to do with it because most of it is Argyle fans. I think the same Argyle fans will go week in, week out if they can. Um, so no, I wouldn't say it's necessarily tourists. I think it's just it prolongs the event, as it were. I suppose you go along at, just say, I don't know, midday. You go to that, have a few drinks, and then you go to the game afterwards, and then you can go back again after the game, and it's just a really nice idea. And I know clubs do things like that. Local pubs do things like that, don't they? Like at Manchester United, I know
Yeah,
they have
yeah.
certain pubs where fans sing songs. But no, that's what Argyle do is actually on site, and like I said, it's really popular. And if I get a day off and I have a game where I don't go, I will try and go along to one because, like I said, I feel a bit ashamed that I've been an Argyle fan for 16 years now, and I've never been to one in my life.
No, you'll have to go. Well, we'll have to get a group going together, mate. I think it's something that it's something that sounds like a good bit of fun, and I'm sure a lot of people will have sort of prepped themselves up for match day with a couple of pre-drinks at that kind of event. I wouldn't be surprised.
Exactly, especially when you're going into the turnstile, still singing some of the ridiculous songs that have been sung. That's all part of the fun. And I think sometimes some football fans take it a bit too seriously. And don't get me wrong, when the whistle's blown, everyone cares about is winning the game. And I get that. But beforehand, if you can have a laugh and mix with different fans and just share experiences, and I'm all for that.
So, what is it that's really sort of created this massive reputation for Plymouth Argyle fans being so vocal? What is it that's created it? Where did it come from?
I think it's the fact, again, I think it's the fact that we're so far away from everywhere. I really do think that plays such a big part of it. I think a lot of Argyle fans are proud to be from this far down south. I think it's quite nice to have the title of the southernmost club, although Truro City are trying to work their way up the leagues. But at the moment, Argyle still are the southernmost crowd. And, like I said, it's sort of that pack mentality. I think if you look at the wider world of football, no one really takes Argyle too seriously. I would say probably a lot of fans don't know much about Plymouth Argyle. When I went away to university in Southampton, most of the people that I lived with didn't even know where Plymouth was. So, I think,
What?
yeah, you'd be surprised. A lot of people get Plymouth and Portsmouth mixed up. Um, so
Wow.
I just don't think the wider footballing community really know that much about Argyle. Like I said, they've never been in the top flight. So you've never had match of a day style highlights. We've never really featured too prominently on Sky Sports News. So I think that makes Argyle fans united in a way. And I think when we do have the days where we are on the big screen, like when we played Liverpool last year, they want to turn up in big numbers and really show the wider world how passionate the fans are. And you can certainly hear it at away games. The away crowd, I have to say, is fantastic. And you don't have to take my word for that. I speak to a lot of media from other clubs, and they say, it is one of the best away crowds of the season. Quite often they have higher away crowds than other clubs in their same division, even if the other clubs only have to travel 60, 70 miles. Argyle quite often have to make 5, 6, 700-mile round trips. They really are long journeys. And when we go to Sunderland later this season, that's going to be I think a
I
16-hour
take
round
a
trip.
flight, mate.
But I can, yeah. Well, we have no airport in Plymouth either, you see.
Oh, of course you don't.
So we'd have to go up to Exeter or Bristol, but that is an option. But there will still be big numbers no matter where we go, and I think that's why Argyle fans deserve so much praise. They really do the club proud.
No, I think that is a big thing, and I think I'll probably have a similar conversation when I'm speaking to a Newcastle fan. Or even fans of like Carlisle. Being that far away, and there's a couple of teams in Wales as well who could probably say the same thing. For being that far away, making it to away days is a big effort. And it can, for a lot of people, cost a lot of money too. So I mean, it is really like it's something that's commendable, and it does show a lot of passion coming from people in the club. And I suppose that sort of brings me onto the next bit. Like I do want to speak a little bit more about the football on the pitch and how how Plymouth Argyle fans sort of envision things going in the coming years. But it's been a weird couple of seasons, hasn't there? I mean, we want to talk about the flavour of Plymouth Argyle. I don't know any other team that used 7 keepers in one season.
I know that is. I don't even know what the word is to describe that. Unique doesn't seem to do it justice. It's so bizarre.
What happened?
Well, so last season we had 7 different keepers, and they all seemed to get injured. So at the very start of the season, we had 3 professional goalkeepers. We had Robert Saloik, we had Luke McCormick, and we had Carl Leverin. And then we had Michael Cooper, who was a youngster that was playing in the reserve team. So they were the 4 keepers that we had in our books, and there was also another youngster called Max Charles, who's very young, so not anywhere near the first team. So we had 4
Right.
that were really there. Robert Taloika injured his back in the third game of the season. Luke McCormick, who was our number one, injured his ankle and was out for a long period of time, and then injured his shoulder. So had to have multiple operations. Carl Leverin came in as a third choice, and then he tore his thigh muscle off the bone. That was against Blackburn Rovers, so he kicked the ball out, and the thigh muscle actually tore off the bone, and he had to be replaced at half time. He was replaced by Michael Cooper, who was a youngster who was finally getting his chance, and then he fractured a finger. So he was out injured. So at that point, you had 4 goalkeepers out injured.
Crazy. I mean, it's a good opportunity for the young lad.
But exactly, it was a fantastic opportunity, and he happened to fracture a finger. So then Derek Adams, the manager, I mean, I don't know what was going through his mind. He must have run over about 8 black cats on the way to a training session one day, or walked under a number of ladders. I'm not sure what he did, but he got on the phone, brought in Remy Matthews on loan from Norwich. Remy Matthews, who's just signed for Bolton Wanderers.
Okay, great.
Brought him in. Finally, we got a goalkeeper, and then he has a good run in the first team. Argyle starts to rise up the league table, and then he injures his shin, and he has to go back to Norwich. So then we got 5 goalkeepers out injured, and then they bring a goalkeeper called Will Mannion in for a Checker Trade Trophy game, because we literally had
at this point. Let me just say, right, at this point, if you're a goalkeeper, why are you going to Plymouth Argyle?
Well, I wouldn't like to know the insurance costs of anyone that has to come to Argyle. If you're a goalkeeper, I don't know the answer to that. You know, they're going to want first team football, but yeah, you would be worried for your health and safety. That's for sure. I'm sure there would be quite a few forms have to be filled in by health and safety assessors these days.
Yeah, I bet. I bet Plymouth are probably saying, we can't cover your health insurance. This is, it's just not. Yeah, it's just not right.
The 5 goalkeepers are injured, and even that in itself seems balmy. Derek Adams, I remember saying before the season started that he wanted to have 3 professional keepers so he could cover for injuries, and even that didn't work. So Remy Matthews had gone back. Will Mannion, a youngster from Hull City, came in on loan just for the one game because we had nobody for a Checker Trade Trophy match. And you've got to remember as well, Argyle playing a local league called the South Western Peninsula League, so they've got duties to fulfil that. So their young goalkeeper, a 16-year-old, had to play in those games. So you've got multiple games in one day, and you have to fulfil duties for all of them. No matter whether it's a competitive game or a South West Peninsula League game. So Will Mannion.
So is that the reserves? Is that like your equivalent of they have the Premier League 2 for most?
Yeah. So basically, it's just a local league for Devon. So there's a lot of like Plymouth Parkway is another team who's very low down, step 7, step 6, and so it's a local league for Cornwall and Devon really. And they've got a reserve league team that play in that to try and get first team football for their players that aren't in the first team.
I didn't even think that was allowed. I thought once you'd registered a player for a reserve game, you weren't allowed to play them on the same day.
No, sorry, that's what I'm saying. So because Argyle had these reserve games, the young keeper, the 16-year-old, couldn't play in the first team because he was playing for these. So what I'm saying is, even the youngsters were duty bound to be playing in these reserve fixtures. So it wasn't only the first team games that the Argyle manager had to think of. So if you get my point, Max Charles, who's a youngster, couldn't play for the first team because he had his duties for the reserve team. So that's why he brought Will Mannion in for the one game in the Checker Trade Trophy against Yeovil. Argyle lost that game, and then Will Mannion went back, and a guy called Keller Roos from Derby came in, and he was a sort of permanent answer or semi-permanent answer to Remy Matthews, and he played on loan, and he, touch wood, didn't get injured somehow. But then Remy Matthews came back to fitness, and obviously he was Derek Adams' first choice emergency keeper. So Keller Roos left, and Remy Matthews came back in. And he played throughout the rest of the season without any other injuries. So that was great. And then this season came along, and Luke McCormick left, Robert Torloik left, Kyle Leverin stayed. So the 3 keepers that Argyle had at the start of this pre-season was Kyle Leverin, youngster Michael Cooper, and they brought in Harry Burgoyne from Wolverhampton Wanderers. And I went and met him on the media day, have a nice chat with him, interviewing him, and said, "Oh, by the way, did you happen to hear the story of what happened to the goalkeepers last season?" And he sort of shrugged it off and laughed. "Oh, I was told a bit about that. I got quite a few Argyle fans tweeted me online to tell me what happened to the goalkeepers, but I'll stay fit. I want to be in the first team. I'm playing for the England youth teams. I want to stay involved in all that." And then lo and behold, a few weeks later, he broke his ankle in a pre-season training match in Holland. So and you're just thinking, not again.
Oh my, that is bad.
And you just thought, I can't believe this is happening again. So that was Argyle's first choice goalkeeper. So Derek Adams, who got his phone, he must have about 50 to 100 goalkeepers just alone in his phone book. I mean, he rung around and he managed to bring Matt Macy in, who, whether it's because Arsenal weren't willing to loan him out at the start of pre-season, I don't know, but he seems on paper a very, very good goalkeeper. Argyle managed to loan him in, and touch wood, at the moment, he's injury-free, as is Carl Lever in the backup and Michael Cooper, the youngster. So at the moment, we've got 3 fit goalkeepers, but in total for the season already, after 3 games, we've already had 4 goalkeepers because 1 got injured.
That's honestly hilarious. And I mean, it's not hilarious in the sense that these guys got injured, but I mean, it's just ludicrous that would even happen.
mean,
I've never heard anything like it before.
No, exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, it is absolutely crazy. And, the physios and the goalkeeping coach had their work cut out last season. And hopefully, I mean, I don't know what Arsenal have said to Matt Macy when he came here. They probably want to wrap him up in bubble wrap when he's not playing games.
Emery probably doesn't have a clue. They've gone to the new manager who's managing in England for the first time. He's not got a clue, has he? Let's be honest.
It's just don't mention injuries. That's all they'll have said.
Yeah, let him find out when he's when he does. Or let him find out when Will Macy gets sent back injured. That's
definitely.
Right. I mean, enough about the goalkeeping situation. I mean, I don't want to talk about it too much in case it happens again. But as a Plymouth Argyle fan, obviously it's got to be great supporting the team and being off to such a good start this season.
Well, I mean, it was a good start in the cup. Obviously, beating Bristol, I think, is going to be a big boost. Obviously, we lost our opening league game against Walsall, drew our second one against Southend. Plymouth Argyle, a notoriously slow starter to a season. It's unusual. I don't know what it is. If anyone did know the answer to why they started so slowly season after season, I think they could earn a lot of money. But Argyle seems to start very slowly. Like I said, last year, I think after about 5, 6, 7 games, we had more red cards than points. I think we had 5 red cards in the first 8 games or something like that. And only like a couple of points. So Argyle do start slowly, but on the whole, I think there's a lot of positivity around the club at the moment. On the pitch, you've got Derek Adams, who took Ross County in Scotland from the lower leagues up to the Scottish Premiership and took them to a cup final. He had great success there. He's come down here. Yeah, he's come down here. He's a very meticulous manager. He plans everything to absolute detail. You sometimes see him walking around an away ground and he's measuring the length of the grass. So he can think about how the ball can be played. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. He really has done that, so he can work out how he best wants to play. Whether the grass is too long to play a certain style of football, he really is meticulous to the last minute. And if things don't go exactly to plan, if something sets one thing off, then he won't be a very happy manager. He arrives at every away ground 90 minutes beforehand. He doesn't like to be a minute late. He's very precise, and I think that's why he'll be a very good manager. And I think, hopefully with Argyle, but if not, I think he will be a very top manager one day.
And the thing is as well, he has done so well because I mean, the first season he came in as well, or I mean, I think it was 2015, 2016. He obviously guided you guys to a playoff final, and then obviously got you promoted, second season. So it's been quite consistent from that end, which is obviously great to know.
To Wembley, again, you asked me earlier on the podcast, and one game I forgot to mention really about ones that still stick in my mind is the Portsmouth semi-final second leg. The League Two playoffs against Portsmouth. Again, we'd drawn 2-2 in the first leg at Fratton Park, and they came back here. And it was a great crowd, and Argyle scored a last-minute winner. Peter Hartley, a defender, scored a header to send us to Wembley. And, that's for the first time since I've been supporting them, and only the second time in Argyle's history that they reached this Wembley. And it was just absolute euphoria. Fans ran onto the pitch, and I know it's not really condoned by Football League clubs, but as a fan, if you watch Gillette Soccer or watch any of the sporting programmes, year upon year, I remember seeing fans running onto the pitch, the grounds, and thinking, I wish that was my club. And it never really ever happened. And when it did a few years ago, when we beat Portsmouth, like I said, 1-0 with the last minute goal, it was absolutely incredible. That was something that will stay with you forever. And it gives you this feeling, and I'm not a particularly emotional person, but I was on the verge of tears when Argyle were doing it because, I don't know, it's this weird feeling that's just inside you and you just can't control it when that happens. So you did a great job in taking Argyle to Wembley. Sadly, we lost AFC Wimbledon, which was a great shame. Argyle's never really turned up that day. It was a total off day. And like you said, the year later, he took us to automatic promotion. Sadly, just missed out on the league title on goal difference. Portsmouth pipped Argyle to the post there. And then he also took us to Anfield to play Liverpool in a cup run. And then, like I said, last year we were bottom end of the table in December, and we finished 7th in the league, and that was an incredible run. So he's really done a great job with us so far.
Yeah, which is crazy, isn't it? I mean, that's one place off from off the playoff places. So if you'd have if you'd just finished just that little bit higher, who knows? Plymouth Argyle could have been in the Championship.
Well,
I
exactly.
mean,
In the final game of the season against Gillingham, we had an outside chance of still getting to the playoffs. I think Argyle had 12 first-team players out injured at that point. They really were running on empty.
right.
And everyone, I think we lost. I can't remember the exact score. I think it was 5-1. It all blurs into 1-1 when things aren't going well. But I think we lost 5-1 to Gillingham on the final day, and that just sort of summed up sort of how low on battery everyone was. I mean, Graham Carey, who's one of who you mentioned earlier, said that last season that if Argyle hadn't had a chance of getting to the playoffs, half the players that were playing wouldn't be playing because they're injured. So it got to that point, and Derek Adams this season, he's really strengthened in numbers, strengthened in depth, and I think that should do Argyle well. And you're saying, what are Argyle's fans' views on the current situation off the pitch as well? Things are going quite well. They're having the grandstand redeveloped, so for finally so this season it will be three-sided stadium for this season. Um, but from next season, hopefully it'll be back to four. When Argyle were in the Championship, they weren't allowed to have standing anymore. And then when they got relegated back to League One, even though there were other teams were standing, Argyle weren't allowed to have standing again. So the bottom half of the grandstand has been deserted for years. So it would be good to finally see that have seats and be filled out. And just this week, actually, Simon Hallett, who was the vice chairman, has got a 64% stake in the club. So the current chairman, James Brent, will be stepping down from that role as of October the 31st. And there'll be a new chairman. Plenty of investment. I think he's put another £3 million into the club to help with this grandstand redevelopment. So off the pitch as well, things are really the ball's really starting to roll now.
I mean, which is brilliant as well, because Home Park, which, by the way, no offense, but it does sound a bit like the default lower league ground on FIFA. It does have a lot of.
I was going to say, I'm surprised. Home Park's never been sponsored or name's never been changed. It must be one of the only grounds in England that doesn't have some sort of sponsorship name to it.
Yeah, it might be as well. I mean, I don't know how old the stadium is. I think it is one of the oldest grounds in the country. I think
the free stands I think came in 2001-ish, but the actual site itself, has been there for God knows how long.
Yeah, and I mean it's a big stadium for a team in the lower leagues. It's 17,000 capacity.
That's what it was before. So now one stand's shut, so it will be a bit smaller currently. But yeah, that has been what it has been. And, regularly Argyle get 12, 13, 14,000 fans. And I think in League One and League Two, where we have been for quite a few years, that wasn't bad under Derek Adams.
Well, look, is that the fact that there is thousands of supporters at every game, and it is a large amount of supporters, obviously, that you do get down. I think to investors, to players, that's that kind of, I think it shows something, big about the club. It shows something homely. It shows something, quite, what's the word? I think it shows something quite traditional as well. Some big values surrounding that club. So there's a chance that they can develop into something big, 100%, right?
100%. There's a lot of land around Home Park as well. You go to a lot of grounds, and like Gillingham, for example, as I mentioned earlier, they're so penned in because of housing around them. There's just no room to expand. But Argyle do have that room if needed. And the thing that I don't understand, and I've always said this, and maybe it's because I'm a bit biased because I'm an Argyle fan, but if I was a foreign investor, I get that it doesn't have the ties to London. I think that's possibly where Argyle fall down. But there's such a catchment area, and probably any Argyle fans that listen to this will be rolling their eyes at me saying this, because it's been the word potential and catchment area that's used so often. But it's true. You've got the whole of Cornwall. There's a lot of Argyle fans in Cornwall, and you've got the whole of Devon, bar Exeter City, without a club apart from Argyle. So there is such potential there. And if I was a Russian oligarch or something, I would definitely want to invest. But right now, there's Simon Hallett's just taken over, and things are on a good upward spiral. Hopefully.
Right. So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about 5 or 10 years time. Where do you want to see Plymouth Argyle? Where it's for I think this is obviously quite a big interesting point for somebody who's not a fan of the club, who's perhaps listening to this as part of their education on English football. Where do you think Plymouth Argyle's potential lies, and where do you want to see them?
Quite simply, where do I want to see them? It's the Premier League. I would love to see them in the Premier League. I would love to see Match of the Day and see that Argyle are included in that. And I know that sounds something so trivial, but I would love the wider world to take a bit of note about Plymouth Argyle, because I do think on the whole we're quite pushed to one side because we're so far away. So I would love people to sort of almost raise their eyebrows seeing them on there. So that's where I'd like them to be. But of course, the gulf between the Premier League and the Championship and League One is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and
It's
bigger. And
growing.
that's where I think it's going to be really tough, because we're going to have teams coming down from the Premier League with such big and ever increasing parachute payments, that it's just going to be so hard to compete. Look at Burton; have done fantastically well to stay in the Championship for how long they did on such a small budget, and I think Argyle will be in a similar position unless some rich tycoon comes in, which is probably unlikely. So I would hope we'd be in the Championship in the next few years. I think that's a realistic ambition. I think Derek Adams is very ambitious. He signed a new contract until 2023, which is unheard of in lower league football. But that just shows the faith that the Argyle board have got in the manager to help get them success. So I think the Championship would be realistic. But if Argyle gets to the Championship in 2-3 years' time, then of course anyone that's ambitious, any fans are going to want them to take the next step and try and push into the Premier League. But it's going to take a lot of investment, and that's my one concern.
Is there? I mean, are the players there? For Argyle to really push on? Do they have the youngsters? Do they have the youth set up? Do you see that team that you've got right now currently? Do you see them growing? Do you see them taking Argyle to the next level?
The youth setup's an interesting one. Argyle have struggled to bridge that gap between youth teams and first team. We don't have anyone coming through the system and really making an impact in the first team, and that is something that Derek Adams is trying to solve. This season, he's appointed a coach that is specifically coaching the youngsters, so the first team professionals that aren't quite at the level to be in the first team. They're getting their own sort of squad and training together. Because Argyle went through administration, obviously, years and years ago, and they sold a lot of players. The likes of Christian Walton went to Brighton, Lloyd Jones went to Liverpool, Sam Gallagher went to Southampton. So you've got a load of players like that went off. Dan Gosling went to Bournemouth. So all these were in Argyle's, were young and up and coming players that Argyle had to sell when they were in administration. And ever since then, they've never really managed to get young players into the first team or sell them on for big money. Now, if you compare them to Exeter City, who's obviously Argyle's closest rivals, they sell the likes of Tom Nichols, Ethan Ampadu to Chelsea. They sell so many players for quite decent fees, and Argyle just haven't quite cracked that yet. So that is something they need to work on. But do this team they've got now, can they push them to the next level? I think so. One of the sort of tick boxes that I look at as a fan and as a journalist even to see that Argyle making progress is where they're signing players from. And this summer we've signed players from Manchester City, Everton, Tafari Moore from Arsenal. And yes, they may be free. Maybe they might be free agents, yes, but the fact they're coming from these clubs rather than coming from other League One clubs, to me, that's a sign that they're on the up. These youngsters are ambitious. They've got Ashley Smith-Brown, who's come from Man City for a nominal fee. We've got the likes of Callum Dyson and Conor Grant, who are youngsters that have come from Everton. The fact that you're getting these young players from Premier League clubs, for me, it's a next tick in the box that says that we're on the right pathway to try and bridge that gap to the Championship.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And some of these players, and I mean, you mentioned Tafari Moore. They've got pedigree in the England international sort of like youth setup as well. So that's always good, because these are players obviously which have been highly rated, by the biggest scouts in England. Really, that's I think that's definitely something that adds to it. But Jak,
sorry, I was going to say it's exciting for fans. When you see you signed a player from Arsenal, whether they've been released or not, it's something that catches the imagination of fans. No disrespect to any lower league clubs, but it does catch the imagination just that little bit more.
Well, he's learned under Wenger. This is the thing that a lot of these players will have learned under the best setups in the country, and I think that's amazing. That's amazing to hear, because it means that even if the player hasn't necessarily pushed on as they would have liked in the past, it means that they've got the potential to, and I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it, for signing up youngsters in that kind of league.
If you can mix that with some experience of players that do know what it's like in League One and do know what it's like in League Two, then I think you've got a really good mix, and that is what Derek Adams has done well. He's got the likes of Tafari Moore, Ashley Smith-Brown, and he's got the likes of David Fox, who's just an absolute stalwart of all the different leagues. He knows what it takes to get into the Championship, and he's got that right mix. And Ryan Taylor as well, who's a great League One striker. So he's got the perfect mixes, and it seems like he's got all the pieces for the jigsaw. And hopefully, they'll get their first win on Saturday in the league against Coventry, and hopefully they can push on and try and compete for a top half and playoff place this season.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing how Plymouth Argyle do. I've certainly learned a lot about the club from just talking to you today, Jak. I mean, it does seem like this is all the time we have for this. But I mean, is there anything you'd wanna add about Plymouth Argyle that would nicely sum this up?
Just that I think they're going to keep trying to flatter to deceive. It's their ambition to try and make people notice them. I think they've done that a little bit under Derek Adams through some of the cup ties and reaching the playoff finals, and they've been on TV more over the last few years. I think Derek Adams is quite the character as well. So I just think watch this space. I think at some point something big will happen with Argyle, and I think hopefully in the next year or two we'll be back in the Championship, and then we can maybe dream about trying to get into the top half of that league.
Certainly. Well, I'm here for it, man. I'm here for it. I don't think it's impossible whatsoever. Like we spoke about in this podcast, they have tremendous potential as a club. But Jak, has been great having you on. Tell us where we can find more of your work, because I know you do a lot of writing about Plymouth Argyle, and I think that's something that people will certainly be more interested in after hearing this interview.
Yeah, well, I'm a journalist at Plymouth Live, so if people on PlymouthLive.com or follow me on Twitter at Jak First, they can find a lot of information on Plymouth Argyle and a few other bits and pieces as well. Hopefully Argyle do well, and hopefully I can write about more wins and defeats, and yeah, that's where you can find me. And thanks to you for having me on. I look forward to listening to the podcast to come in the next few weeks and months.
Well, thanks a lot for being my first guest today, Jak, and good luck to Plymouth Argyle. Of course, finishing 7th last season. Can they push for promotion this season? Let's wait and see. This is, of course, the first episode of Challenge 92. Thank you all for joining me today. I am, of course, Daniel Raza. Please hit us with some feedback on the official Instagram page, challenge_92. Let us know what you thought about the episode. Share the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, up on iTunes, and of course, SoundCloud. This has been Daniel Raza. You can follow me on Twitter at DHRaza. And of course, thank you to Jak Ball for joining us on the podcast today. We'll see you next time.